If it's been a good morning, make some noise. Okay. I just want to make sure that it's not just me. If it is just me, I guess that's fine too. I'll spend some time like that, but I had a feeling that there were other people in the room who felt the same way. That it is incredible to be able to come together and to worship Him, to worship His goodness, His greatness, to worship His love and His grace, to thank Him for who He is. I mean, it's an incredible thing to be able to experience each and every Sunday morning, that we are not limited to being able to worship Him or not being able to worship Him. But we can come together like that every week. Think through some of those words that we just sang, that He is our firm foundation. He is the rock on which we stand. There are a lot of different options out there. But if we are singing those words, we are saying, Jesus, you are the one on which I stand. You are the one on which I will find truth. You are the one on which I will find peace. You are the one on which I will find joy. When everything around me feels like it's falling apart, you are the central figure that holds it all together. You are the cornerstone that makes sure that the building stays square, that makes sure that it is solid. God, I'm sitting here and I'm saying, or I'm standing and I'm singing, that you are the firm foundation upon which I stand. Those are powerful words to be declaring. Powerful words to be declaring. And I hope that we don't sing those just because they're on the screen, but that we stop and we realize just what it is that we're saying. Because Jesus, as we look at Him and as we read what we have of the accounts that we have in the Gospels, we see that He is a man who shook things up all the time. And He continues to shake things up all the time. I realize that those two things don't really seem to go together. But we just said He was the firm foundation upon which I stand when everything around me is shaking. Now He's the one that's going to shake things up. I realize that's two different analogies that don't really go together all that much. But He does. He gives us a firm foundation to stand on while at the same time shaking things up in our lives. It's what got Him in a whole lot of trouble when He was walking on the earth nearly 2,000 years ago. As He was having discussions with people, as He was teaching, as He was pushing back against the religious establishment, He continually shook things up, and it took Him to the point of being arrested, of being tried, of eventually being crucified for the things that He said and the things that He did. But there was an instance, and you've probably read it at some point or you've heard it at some point if you've grown up in the church or you've spent much time around the church. If you haven't, this might be a new story to you. But there is a moment, and I want you to try and picture it in your mind, where Jesus is standing before a man named Pilate. Full name, Pontius Pilate. It's not actually his full name, but that's what we call him. Standing before Pontius Pilate, and they're having a discussion because Jesus he's been arrested in the garden. We've had that part. And then he's been kind of put on this little mock trial thing with the religious establishment. And they have finally taken Him in front of the authorities, the governmental authorities, which is what Pilate is representing. And now Pilate and Jesus are having a discussion. And Pilate's peppering him with questions, and Jesus is just kind of sitting there, and he's like, if you say it's true, then it's true. I'm not going to deny any of it. I'm not going to sit here and try and prove myself or anything like that. I'm not going to argue with you. And Jesus continues to take some of the things that are coming at Him that Pilate is asking Him. He's standing before Him kind of in almost a courtroom type of an area, but not really. Because it's not like there's a jury or anything. It's not the way that we vision things or that we see things today in the United States of America. But they're having this back and forth, and then Jesus makes an incredible statement that shook things up. Now remember, as He makes this statement, He is making this to a Roman official. A Roman official who worships multiple gods. A Roman official who believes that truth is something that's kind of maybe a little bit on a slippery scale. Depends which God you're talking to, as far as which truth it is that you need to live in that moment. A time that really, if we look at it, there are a lot of similarities to the time that we live in today, as far as what is being worshiped, as far as where truth is being found. It's a moment similar to that. And He's standing before this government official. And in John chapter 18, if you want to turn there, I'm not going to be in it real long, although we are going to reference it several times this morning. In John chapter 18, we're going to start, and I'm going to read for you from verse 37 first. So as you're getting there, Jesus makes this statement to Pilate. He says, "You say that I am a king. They've been talking about kingdoms, they've been talking about kingship, they've been talking about what it means to have authority, all those different types of things. And Jesus tells him, I was born for this. And when Jesus says the words, I was born for this, if we are Christ followers, or if we're just wanting to learn more about this man named Jesus, anytime somebody says, I was born for this, or this is my purpose in life, anything like that, we should probably pay attention if we want to know something about that person. And Jesus says, I was born for this, and I have come into the world for this, to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. And then Pilate responds with a question, what is truth? And there it is. It's the big question. It's the big enchilada. It's the fizz and the cola. It's the question that we've been asking throughout the ages. What is truth? It's the question that prompts the discussions that Tom Cruise had with Jack Nicholson and A Few Good Men, where he looks at him and he says, I want the truth. Ooh, his voice didn't crack like that, though. And Jack Nicholson responds with a, you can't handle the truth. You remember that line if you watched the movie? Even if you didn't, you've probably heard that at some point. Or the X-Files. What was the theme from the X-Files? Like the big phrase. Anybody remember? The what is out there? The truth is out there. This search, this quest for truth that we have been on throughout all of eternity. What feels to many as this elusive thing that they're looking for, Jesus says, I have come into the world for this, to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. And Pilate asks that question that we're still asking today, what is truth? It's where we get ideas like we have today of what's true for you might not be true for me. Or that's your truth, or there is no truth. Those comments are out there today. Those statements, those questions, all those things are out there today because there is still a world. And when I say a world, I include us in that, or at least many of us in that are sitting there and saying, what is truth? The quest to answer that question is where we get the idea that you've probably heard at some point of cultural tolerance. Now, I want to be very clear that tolerance itself is a very, very Christian thing. I know that that word has a lot of connotations behind it. That word, it feels dirty in the minds or in the mouths of some Christ followers. But tolerance in and of itself is a Christian thing. But it is a seductive lie of the enemy, this idea of cultural tolerance. And what do I mean by cultural tolerance? I'm using that word intentionally to signify between two different types because the definition that we use for tolerance is a very, very big deal. Sean McDowell said it this way. Sean McDowell, one of the leading voices in the apologetics movement right now, apologetics not being those who apologize for being Christian, but those who present evidence for Christianity. He says it this way, cultural tolerance propagates the notion that there is no hierarchy of moral truth, that all truth is equal. That's the idea behind cultural tolerance. That's the idea behind the statements of what is true for you might not be true for me, or you can have your truth. See, cultural tolerance is teaching or is trying to get through the idea, is propagating, to use his really cool word that he used in there, is propagating the idea that nobody can really know and nobody can hold over another person any kind of truth. That everybody has the right to their own truth. That everybody has the right to believe whatever they want. And on the surface, that's true. Everybody does have the right to believe whatever they want. But that doesn't mean that all truths or all truth claims are equal. Cultural tolerance would like us to believe that. It's this idea that you can't claim to have the truth because you might be putting somebody else down as you claim that truth. That by you saying that you are correct, you are telling somebody else that they're incorrect, which is true, but they are saying that that is an intolerant and a hateful thing to do. The enemy loves for us to fall for this lie of cultural tolerance. The enemy loves for us to step into this idea of cultural tolerance, that all truths all truth claims are of equal value and hold equal weight. This idea that all truth eventually leads to the same place anyway, that all religions eventually lead to the same place anyway. As Christ followers, we have to recognize the lie that is within this claim. I realize that it's something that's going to get us accused of a lot of things. And I realize it's not popular. And I realize if you turn on the news, it is not what you see. Or at least it's not what you see you are being told to believe. The enemy wants us to believe that it's true, and he wants us at the same time to attack anybody who doesn't believe that it's true. He wants us to hide from the questions that we're asking. He wants us to hide from the questions that others are asking, or he wants us to just put down anybody who's asking a different question than we are. The enemy loves this idea of cultural tolerance. He wants us to believe that we believe what we believe. I know that's a lot of belief right there. Let me say that part again. He wants us to believe that why we believe what we believe is based solely upon our upbringing, is based solely upon the influences that have been in our lives throughout the course of our life, that it is completely due to the biases that we have established over the course of our life. Maybe it's because of something your parents taught you, it's something you grew up in the church or you didn't grow up in the church, and that's the only reason that you believe what it is that you believe, and therefore your belief holds no more moral truth than anybody else's belief. I think it's important for us to understand, or important for us to admit, that we do have biases. Anyone who tries to claim that there is no bias is probably lying. Because we all have some bias in our life. We all have different things that we are convinced of because of some of our past experiences, because of some things that we've been taught over the course of our life. We all have those within us. And it's important for us to understand that we cannot allow our bias to influence the actual truth. Or I should say, to influence what we believe to actually be true. It's important for us as we open up this book and we read through Scripture to not allow our bias to read into the Scripture, but instead to allow the Scripture to read into and to influence us. And we can do it so easy. We can open it up and we can start reading and we're coming into it and we're like, I'm already convinced that this is true and therefore I'm going to find every verse that supports everything that I say, or I'm going to interpret this verse to mean this. But the other part about bias is that just because we are biased towards something, or just because somebody else is biased towards something, doesn't change whether or not that something is true. Our bias doesn't actually influence the truth at all. It influences how we interpret the truth. It influences how we communicate the truth. But it doesn't actually influence the truth at all. Let me give you an example. By now, you have figured out I'm a Chiefs fan. We'll skim over that part pretty fast. I am pretty biased towards the Chiefs. When they make draft picks, like we just had in the NFL draft, I assume they know what they're doing, and I assume that it's going to be good for the team. Other people are looking at it who are not Chiefs fans are like, wow, they made some stupid picks. We've got a few Colts fans in here. I've figured that out over the course of living in Indiana. You picked a quarterback with the 5th overall pick that some people think is a horrible choice and other people think is a great choice. If you are a Colts fan and you trust your GM, you are biased towards believing that it is a good pick. Back to me and liking the Chiefs, though. I am biased towards them making good decisions and believing that they know what they're doing. However, my bias and your bias towards the Colts, or whatever team it may be, does not change the fact that the Chiefs won the Super Bowl this year. Doesn't change the truth. You can boo all you want. They still won the Super Bowl. Twilight, the Packers, it's not going to happen. That's just the truth. It doesn't change the truth just because of my bias. Or let's take something a little bit more serious than our NFL preferences. I am a straight male who has been married to his wife for 16 or 17 years. Probably should have figured that one out ahead of time. I have 4 brothers who are all married to women, who have kids of their own. I have in my life never felt the attraction to another male, and I have my beliefs about homosexuality. Now, some would say that my beliefs are based solely on my biases. Others would also say that I'm lying when I tell you that I have never felt an attraction to another male. Because everybody, they would say, feels an attraction to the same sex at some point in their life. To which I would respond, that may be a little bit of your bias coming through here, because that has come from your experiences. Whether you yourself have felt that attraction or whether or not you yourself are surrounded by people who feel that attraction, it influences what we believe about these things. But my bias based on my experience and my upbringing, and this person's bias based on their experience and their possible upbringing, whatever influences there may be there, does not change where the truth lies on this discussion that we're having. I know you're sitting there and you're going, no, that's what we're talking about this morning, right? No. It is just an example of how our biases can tend to make us believe that everybody else is wrong because it's just their bias. But the truth is, the truth doesn't change just because of our personal bias. Some truths we have to learn to admit are a little bit situational. For instance, I can eat a regular waffle and be perfectly fine. Waffles are fantastic. I love waffles. They are good for me. But they are not good for somebody who is gluten intolerant. It's going to cause them a whole lot of uncomfortable feelings throughout the rest of their day. Waffles, good for me, maybe not for you. Now, you can make the argument that waffles aren't really good for anybody. That's a different topic when it comes to waffles. But some things are a little bit situational. And there are moments where we can stand up and we can say that lying is always wrong. Across the board, lying is always wrong. And then we have to wrestle with the stories of Rahab being mentioned in the Hall of Faith because she lied to the government officials who came to her door asking for her to give up the Israelites. And she said, they already took off. They're gone. As she was hiding them on the roof of her building. Or the slave harborer who, as somebody came up to their door and said, do you have slaves in your house? And they said, nope, I don't. To protect the slave, we would say that lie, and I should say most of us would say, that lie was acceptable. And that lie is not a lie that God is condemning somebody for, because that lie was for the good of another individual. I get it. It can turn into we can just make up whatever we want. But we do have to understand that some things are situational. And some things are true for me, but not for you. But what we have to do and what we have to be careful of is not to allow our beliefs and our opinions and the influences in our life to change what we believe and what we communicate to be true. And that's not easy to do. Being honest is part of it, but it's also running down some of these things that we hear and understanding where they fall apart. That in this world where we're hearing about cultural tolerance all the time and how we have to accept everybody for everything that they are, where we hear statements like, that's true for you, but it's not for me, where we hear statements like, there is no truth, we have to stop. And rather than just saying, you know what, we're going to allow that to go out with it, we're going to accept, because we're not even talking this morning about how we're communicating with other people. It is really easy to start jumping into here's how we use this against other people. Here's how we use this to talk to other people. I don't want us to get to that point this morning. I want us to stop this morning. So I apologize if I jump ahead a few times. I'm going to try and reel myself back if I do that. But when we hear that statement of there is no truth, it can be easy to start believing that. But ask yourself the question, is that statement true itself? Because if that statement is true itself, then that means that there is truth, which means the statement is false. And it immediately begins to fall apart. If somebody says there is no truth, then we have to wrestle with, well, if there is no truth, then that statement alone cannot be true. Do you understand where I'm going with that one? Did I get any head nods out there? Yeah, give me something. I realize this can start turning into a circle really fast, which is kind of the idea behind it. That I know that it feels really good to be able to just walk around and be like, you know what? Everyone can just, it's fine. All religions are going to lead to the same place anyway. It's all perfectly fine. People can believe whatever they want. I can believe whatever I want. Because if we can believe whatever we want and we don't have to adhere to any kind of moral standard, any kind of truth, then we can do whatever we want. And we can reason out whatever it is that we want to do. And we like to say that that's what happens to people outside of these walls. But that is so easy what can happen to us inside these walls. I don't necessarily mean just while we're sitting in the seats, but even as we leave, it can be really easy to justify all the things that we want to do by forcing them into a tolerance view or everything can be true for one person but not for another person. It's the law of non-contradiction. It is the law that says that two opposing truths cannot both be true. It's not logically possible. The Chiefs cannot both have won the Super Bowl and not won the Super Bowl in the same year. And I get it. The multiverse is all the rage right now. And so maybe in some other universe it happened that way. The Chiefs cannot have won and not won. Two opposing truths cannot both be true. And according to Jesus, there is no Christian truth or worldly truth. Truth is just truth. And we don't define him. Christ-led tolerance, remember I said that tolerance itself is a very Christian idea. Christ-led tolerance is, again, according to Sean McDowell, I love the way he puts it, so I'm just going to use his words. Values, respects, and accepts the individual without necessarily approving or participating in that person's beliefs or behaviors. Case in point, I would give you the woman who was caught in adultery. That as they brought her out to Jesus, Jesus did not sit at her and go, "You slut." I know, you're not supposed to say that word in church. He didn't look at her and start degrading her for her behaviors. He didn't tell her that she deserved to die, but he valued the person. He loved the woman. He looked at her as an image bearer of his Father, and he built her up. He defended her, not her actions. He defended her as a person. But those last words that he said to her after everybody else left did not say, "Hey, you know what? You can do whatever it is that you want to do because I value you." No, he said, "Go and sin no more." He didn't sit there and say, "Your behaviors are fine." He said, "Go and sin no more." Christian tolerance, Christ-led tolerance, values, respects, and accepts the individual without necessarily approving of or participating in that person's beliefs or behaviors. We cannot fall for the enemy's lies and still follow the truth of Christ. Christ followers, I know we like to have it both ways. We like to live with one foot over here and one foot over here and just try to keep everybody happy. But we cannot fall for the lies of cultural tolerance and still follow the truth of Christ, because this is what Christ said about himself. In John chapter 18 and verse 37, we already read these words, "I was born for this, and I have come into the world for this, to testify to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to not a voice, not their voice of choice. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice." In John 14:6, he read those words that we say so often. He says, "I am the way and the truth and the life." Now, you might not believe that his words are true. You might look at him and think he is a complete wackadoo. He was a lunatic. He was just a liar. He didn't know what he was talking about. You can choose to believe that if you want. You can choose to believe that these words are true if you want. But what you cannot do is have it both ways, or say that anybody can have it both ways. Either he is or he isn't who he said he is. It cannot be both. The law of non-contradiction says that he cannot both be the truth and not the truth at the same time. He didn't say, I am a truth. He didn't say, I am some people's truth. He says, I am the truth. And that is where the big hang-up comes for people who are deciding whether or not they want to accept this whole idea of Christianity. Whether or not they want to follow Christ. It may be a big hang-up for you this morning. As you're looking at any decision, as you're looking at the big decision of whether or not to follow him, or as you're looking at different choices that you make in your life, and it may be a hang-up for you that you're sitting there and you're going, I don't want to choose him in this one. So for this, I'm going to choose my own way. For this, I'm going to believe my own thing. For this, I'm going to believe the culture's thing. He's saying, look, either I am or I'm not, but you can't have this both ways. You're either in or you're out. And in a world of cultural tolerance, that's not real acceptable. We are going to have to understand that if we are going to decide for ourselves that he is the truth, again, that doesn't change whether he is or not. That just changes how we're going to believe. If we're going to decide that he is the truth, then we have to be all in on him being the truth. We get caught up in fighting over whether or not LGBTQ things are true or not true. We get caught up on whether or not abortion is a good thing or a bad thing. We get caught up on all these behavioral things many times before we stop to just dig in to the truth. Because truth isn't about having more knowledge. It's not so that we can win an argument. It's not so that we can tell everybody that CNN or Fox News are completely worthless. Truth is not so that we can be the smartest person in the room. Truth is not so that we can just tell everybody how they're wrong or how they need to look more like us or how they should believe more like us. Truth isn't about making sure that everybody follows our biases. Truth is none of those things. Truth is instead found in John chapter 8 when Jesus said to the Jews who had believed him, if you continue in my word, you really are my disciples. You will know the truth, and here's what the truth does. It's not a list of all those rules. It's not any of those things. The truth will set you free. Truth is freedom. Truth is freedom from the bondage that pulls us down. Truth is freedom from the anxieties that we have. Truth is freedom from the worries. Truth is freedom from all of those things. Truth is freedom from the sin in our lives that we realize is not finding us true freedom, that is not making us feel better. No matter how many times we're told, this will make you feel better, and we go and we try it and it doesn't make us feel better. Truth is saying, I'm here to give you freedom from all of those things. Not so that you can just tell everybody else how to be like you, but so you can tell everybody how to be free. I said it on Easter Sunday morning, and I believe it today just as much as I believed it 3 weeks ago, that obedience is not bondage. Obedience to Jesus is not bondage. Obedience to Jesus is true and absolute freedom. And if you're walking around and you're saying that I'm all in, and you're like, but I don't feel at all free, then there is something that is still pulling you back. There's an enemy that will always attack, but there is something that you haven't fully given up. There's a lie that you're still believing, and it is important to discover what that lie is. Because freedom, maybe we can start a new word. Trudom. There we go. Freedom is intended for you to be free. Truth is intended for you to be free. And so when we read those words in Ephesians that we're going to look back on, some of you are like, hey, I thought we were going to read Ephesians 4 like every week for the next however many weeks. Oh, we're still reading it this morning. But we needed to take a moment and we needed to discuss what that truth really is first. That when he says the truth will set you free, he's saying, I will set you free. That's the truth that I came to communicate to the world around you. That's the truth that I came to communicate to you, was that I came so that you may have life and have it more abundantly, so that you may have freedom. Last week, I asked you 3 questions. And I gave you some little notebooks so that you could write down your questions. And I actually had a few of you this past week come up and say, so what are we supposed to do with those notebooks from here on out? Like, are we supposed to keep bringing those back? Or are we supposed to keep writing them throughout the week? What's the plan with those notebooks? And honestly, I looked at those of you who asked that question and went, I don't know. I wanted you to have a spot to write down the answers to 3 questions. And so I got on Amazon and I found some really cheap notebooks and I gave them to you. I didn't really think through what happens for the next 2 months with those notebooks. But if you have that notebook with you, if you have hung on to it, maybe you don't have it this morning, but if you have it at home somewhere, if your kids haven't gotten a hold of it and turned it into a coloring notebook yet, or maybe even if they have, you can just write over it. I'd encourage you to take those 3 questions and continue to look at those, but to add 3 more questions to it. Last week, I asked you the questions of what do you believe is true about truth? Why do you believe it? And how does your life reflect that? This morning, as we've discovered who truth is, I would ask you these questions. What do you believe about Jesus? Why do you believe it? And how does your life reflect it? Not what does your pastor believe about Jesus. I've given you at least an inkling of what I believe about him this morning. I don't want you just to write down the answers that I gave you this morning. I want you to wrestle with these questions. You can do it this morning while we sing a song. You can take them home this afternoon. You can do it then. You can write them in those notebooks, or you can do whatever you want as far as answering them. But I encourage you to ask those questions and answer those questions. What do you believe about Jesus? Why do you believe it? And how does your life reflect it? If you'd open to Ephesians chapter 4, we're going to look at these words again this morning. Starting in verse 1. I'm going to read from a different translation this morning because I know that we don't all come in with the same translation, and so we're going to switch it up a little bit from what I read up here. And I know that if you're reading from the ones in the pews, that is the New International Version, and that'll probably be the last one that I get to read from. Not because I don't like it, just because it probably will be. But I'd encourage you to still look at what's in there. If you didn't bring your own Bible, that is. Ephesians chapter 4, this is Paul writing to the church in Ephesus. He says, "Therefore I, the prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk worthy of the calling that you have received, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, accepting one another in love, diligently keeping the unity of the Spirit with the peace that binds us. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope at your calling. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in all." He's not leaving any options for a secondary source here. Are you catching that? "Now grace was given to each one of us according to the measure of the Messiah's gift. For it says, when he ascended on high, he took prisoners into captivity. He gave gifts to people. But what does he ascended mean except that he descended to the lower parts of the earth? The one who descended is also the one who ascended far above all the heavens, that he might fill all things. And he personally gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers, for the training of the saints in the ministry, to build up the body of Christ, until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of God's Son, growing into a mature man with a stature measured by Christ's fullness. Then we will no longer be little children, tossed by the waves and blown around by every wind of teaching, by human cunning, with cleverness and the techniques of deceit. But speaking into